I was asked to talk a bit about myself before I started my presentation, and just so you know, I wrote that title before I knew what I was writing, so I'd forgotten that that was my title of my presentation, so I'll try and make it relevant somehow. My journey's been quite eclectic and eventful. I started life as an actor. Some of you know that because we were talking last night. Wasn't it a fab night? I'm so thankful that you're all here. Thank you for coming. After seeing the colour of some of your faces this morning, it's quite something. So yes, I started as an actor, and I spent sort of 15 years acting and waitressing. I was writing for a BBC Science strand. Some of you might remember, some of you are old enough to remember Tomorrow's World, and they were launching a website. And this was 1996 probably, and it was before BBC Online. I mean, I can't even imagine a world now without BBC Online. It's just so huge for all of us. And I had a career change there and then. I was just so I suppose, inspired and knocked out by the potential power of communication of that tool and the possibility of the disruption that the internet was going to cause to an industry that I'd worked in all my life. So I started working at BBC Online and launched the drama and entertainment portals. Including the EastEnders one, which was no mean feat, because all the actors thought that with the webcam that they could all be heard and everything was going to be in the news of the world the next day. So they were all extremely paranoid about having a very basic webcam. But yeah, it was. Then I went to Channel 4, and they were launching a youth channel called E4, and I went over there to help them with that, launch that. And we launched quite an innovative, all-singing broadband proposition with a huge commissioning budget to deliver lots of lovely content, and of course nobody had broadband. It was all dial-up, so we had to completely change the business proposition. So that was exciting and interesting. And then I went over to Discovery, and it was at Discovery that the Discovery Channel, that I started my journey into moving away from being creative into being an operations and technical person. And I launched quite a lot of services around the world in mobile TV and video platforms. And then I was asked to be the European IT director. And I had one of those moments of, what, you mean me? It's like, really? Obviously, I've always been creative, stroke operational, very commercially savvy, I suppose. And but to move into the technical side was a real leap of faith by the technologists that ran Discovery globally. And the reason why they wanted me to do that was because they saw the fact that I knew television inside out and back to front. I had things to learn about core infrastructure, and I had things to learn about HR systems and finance systems, but the nuts and bolts of running a TV or broadcasting organisation, I knew, and I knew all of the commercial and the challenges. And I guess that's why they took a huge leap to give me that role, and it wasn't one that I took lightly. But I guess that's what I'm here to sort of talk to you about today, is how organisations communicate with each other from a technologist perspective into their business customers, and how, I guess, we innovate and disrupt ourselves before we're disrupted. So I'll get on with the presentation, and hopefully innovation will show somewhere and feature in there. So just a word on my business sector. There are lots of parallels, I think, with your business sector, in that the globalization and, I guess, the democratization of content and the way people are consuming content has shifted dramatically. That said, in the UK, 79% of people, regardless of demographic, are still viewing TV in live, scheduled, linear fashion. So it's about that balance of what's going to happen with the EPG, the electronic program guide, what's going to happen with that market, and where's the balance of investment into unproven revenues and customer behaviour changing versus the core revenues of today and on a stable offering. So yeah, I guess it's the change in customer requirement that is both driving and giving us all sleepless nights, basically. So my timer's not going. I don't know how long I've spoken for. Oh, yes, the slides. Incidentally, I've created some of the slides. I think Eileen said that you might want to take the slides away. So I've created some slides. Feel free to use them, make them your own, adapt them, change them, rewrite them, or throw them in the bin. But yeah, do feel free to take them and use them as you see fit. So
fingertip shopping will be one of the many homemakers' conveniences. This video console will be channeled into the store of her choice. There, a camera will scan a display of wares, which she will select by push button. Another part of this console is a household monitor screen, which maintains a watch on critical areas in the house, swimming pool, or yard. What the wife selects on her console will be paid for by the husband at his counterpart console. All bills and transactions will be carried out electronically. A central bank computer will debit the family's account the amount of purchases and credit the department store, for example, informing the family's home computer at the same time. Father, at the touch of a button, receives an instantaneous printed copy of his budget, the amount of taxes he owes, the payments left on the car, and so forth. All documents and household records are available on the video screen for immediate reference. Also at his disposal is an electronic correspondence machine, or home post office, which allows for instant written communication between individuals anywhere in the world. To maintain these and hundreds of complex electronic circuits, a monitor checks all circuits every few seconds, inserts a backup circuit if and when trouble develops, and alerts the communal service agency for replacement.
I love that video. I so hope it's real and not one of the hoax, it's not been made up. I guess the point there is that innovation is responding to human need and want, and not just because the technology is available. And a girl will always want to shop, or this girl will anyway. But that was 1966. Man had just landed on the moon. But the pace of change in the last 10 years has been extraordinary. 3 years ago, Android devices didn't exist. Now there's, I don't know, is it 1.3 million connections a day or something? It's just insanity. It took Facebook only 8 years to get to 1 billion customers. Marks and Spencers have taken 130 years to get to 21 million. So how do we, as technologists, respond to that change and customer expectation, and meanwhile it's set against a digital backdrop? Remember when walking down the street was the first sign of madness? Oh, come on, I thought that was funny. Now it's considered completely usual. People walk down the streets with their headsets, talking to themselves. Nobody crosses over. Everyone just thinks it's usual. So what's become normal in the last few years, we could never have predicted. We could never have predicted that 10 years previously I was getting off a train in Reading to go to my last acting gig, a dreadful play it was, I can't even remember what it was, and 10 years later I'd be going in to sign a global telecommunications deal with Cisco in Reading, in the same place, getting off the same train at the same platform. We couldn't have predicted what would happen in the last 10 years, so how are we going to predict what happens in the next 10 years? Everything's changing. everything. And there's oceans and oceans of data that's meant to be helping us predict what the future is. But is it really? So how do we disrupt ourselves? How do we do that? Nothing is standing still. I don't want to overegg that, but it's very real for us and for every single one of us in the room. We're all trying to maintain our services as they are. Meanwhile, we're running to catch up. And that more so now than ever with the globalization of our industries and the rapid innovation and democratization of what we do. You know, we look to the cloud, we've done that. We look to outsourcing all of our risk, we've done that. We feel like we're on top of things. And just when we think we can put our feet up and relax a little bit, it all changes again. And the market changes around us. I did have actually a big sound effect on that went boom, but I thought maybe not today. So what is changing? For us in the media industry, it's the way that content is being consumed on platforms. It's still the same content. It's still video, it's still text, it's still audio, it's still photography and images. It's all the same thing. It's just a question of how we're consuming it. And I think that's the same for your media sector as well. I've got another little video to show you, and it's slightly tangential, but I couldn't resist it. And it's all about visual learning and how the generation that's coming up now are looking at video to much more to stimulate their learning. So apologies in advance for the sound quality of this, but as I said, I really couldn't resist it. Had enough of that. Isn't that brilliant? I can't tell you how many hits that's had on YouTube, just millions. It's brilliant. So back to business. How do we help our business partners innovate and see us as not just a back office service, especially as we're firefighting just to stand still? I don't know if this is you, constantly firefighting, constantly trying to drive efficiencies through, constantly trying to maintain some kind of quality of service. My first 18 months at Discovery was in the IT role, was exactly that, was trying to maintain the status quo, make sure that everybody was on side, and make sure that they understood what our challenges were and how we were responding to their challenges. Limited success, but we tried to do that. Meanwhile, we were being asked to cut budgets at 21% at one point, which is, you know, trying to articulate the risk to non-technologists of that. I don't know if that sounds familiar to you, but it's certainly very familiar to a lot of the organisations that I'm working in over the last couple of years. They're trying to maintain a quality of service, meanwhile having their budgets cut and the business not understanding the associated risk with that. So the question is how do we deal with that, and how do we innovate for the future? So I just want to spend a minute on what I call big IT, and going into some of the organisations that I have been over the last year particularly. Sort of big IT's really been owned by the top five. There's been stories, I don't know if anybody read the Wired story last month about Her Majesty's Revenues and Customs, and one of the projects there was with Capgemini, and it overran by £2 billion. It was the identity card, overran by £2 billion, and then overran by 18 months, and then it was scrapped. So, you know, there's a lot to learn for us as organisations around how we outsource risk and insource risk, and that big pendulum going backwards and forwards and round and round. And obviously it's never the same. We outsource, we insource, we outsource, and we learn all the time. So again, how are we disrupting for the future as we're maintaining the day-to-day? So this is how other organisations are doing it. So I'm just going to spend some time showing you how some of the organisations I've been working in are achieving to certain levels of with certain levels of success that tension between today and tomorrow. So I want to start with trust and communication. And talking to quite a few of you last night, this seems to be quite something that a lot of you are grappling with. And so I'm going to spend a little bit of time just talking about that, if I may. And I put some slides in, back in, actually, around leadership. So let's get going and talk about that. So this diagram particularly has been very useful for some organisations that I've worked within. And it's sort of a latter-day heat map. I don't know if you're familiar with heat maps. Familiar with heat maps? Yeah? Okay, great. So it's like, am I hot, am I not, kind of with my relationships with my key stakeholders. So I started when I was at Discovery with a set of key stakeholders who were just didn't know why I needed to be at certain meetings, could not understand it. It was like, well, my laptop works, why do you need to be here? And there was a big mergers and acquisition. They bought a broadcaster in Sweden. And all of this information was coming into the data room, and I was having a conversation in the lift, and I said, oh, is there any technology data in the data room? Like, no, why would we need that? So I kind of, well, let's have a meeting, let's talk about that. So then we got onto, well, I know who IT are, I know what they do, I know it's not just about my laptop and my phone, and then we got to, yeah, I know I should invite you to the meeting, but I really don't know why. Does that sound familiar? Yeah. And then we got to, all right, I know why, and I know I should invite you, but I forgot. I'm really sorry. So it's still not front of mind. And then it's, I remember to invite you, I know why you need to be here, but for God's sake, I can't understand a word you're saying. And vice versa, let me tell you. And then you get to this bit here, which is we absolutely understand who we both are. Now, it's really important, and as I said, just from based on last night, from talking to quite a few of you, that what you perceive to be your relationship, and whether you're hot or not with your key stakeholders, quite often is you have to be really honest with yourselves. I did a job late last year, and it was for a broadcaster, and it was to go in to do what they called an IT audit. Yeah. And so basically what I was brought in for was the CTO wanted to demonstrate to his board that he had complete trust with his key stakeholders on the run budget, and therefore it would be okay to trust him with millions of pounds to then start innovating and taking the organisation forward, which is all the sexy stuff, right? So I said to him, okay, well, where do we think we are on the heat map? And with that section, with all of his key stakeholders, huge global organisation, he said this one up here. There was one stakeholder which was down here, but it was all up here. So I went off, spoke to his key stakeholders, and he wanted the two programs that he wanted me to start thinking about how him and his organisation were going to communicate with standardisation and end-to-end digitisation of content. And what transpired was his perception of where he was not where his business leaders said he was. And it was all around the day-to-day that wasn't happening. So they'd implemented lots of new printers, but they hadn't put the correlate function on. So broadcasting organisation, loads of scripts every day. One particular soap had to employ 2 runners to kind of manually correlate all the scripts. One current affairs programme almost didn't go to air because they didn't realise that the scripts wouldn't come out nicely all in order with a nice staple in the top. Seems really simple, but it was missed out, and that was a core requirement that was missed. Again, similarly, phones were new phone systems. There was no usage and adoption training program that went with that, so people were using their mobiles. I could go on and on and on with all of the day-to-day services that had been missed or weren't working. And so what the project moved and shifted from him thinking that he had the trust of his key stakeholders into how do I now get the trust of my key stakeholders, and how do we start speaking the same language and understanding each other's challenges. So this was kind of the journey to partnership that we started on. So all of this over here, the data, the analysis, the BI, the insight, sort of these two over here, they're very comfortable with as an organisation. This, absolutely, but then translating it into what might be meaningful for the stakeholders was where it started to get uncomfortable. And they're moving out of their comfort zone over here into the commercialisation and innovation space, and really delivering bigger business value. So, and it was this bit here that was missing, and that is absolutely vital to moving forward with innovation and disruption. So the elasticity of leadership. It's a phrase that's been used a little bit at the moment, so apologies if it's a bit of a cliche. But I really believe that understanding your leadership style and how it impacts those around you is really important for us to be leading with innovation. And it's about understanding the maturity of your stakeholders and the business. So there might be a core set of your business audience who are more mature than your other set. So it's adapting your communication and what you communicate with them accordingly about how mature they are as an organisation. And so you don't want to be behind them from a technology perspective and their expectation, because that would be really uncomfortable. You don't want to be, you need to be on it rather, and slightly ahead. But if you're too far ahead over here, you'll completely lose them. But that said, we still need to be looking right over here, because we're the ones that understand the advances. They understand their audience and their customer, and it's about putting those two things together, as we saw in the previous slide. So it's really important to understand how mature your customers are and how you are going to communicate with them, and how far in the future do you go, meanwhile in understanding their investment in the past, their emotional investment, the investment in processes, etc., etc. I rather like this diagram. There's an artist, he's based in America, called Hugh MacLeod. Go and check him out. He does a lot of this kind of stuff. It's like kind of Dilbert's kind of thing. But so leadership is quite a hard thing. You can feel really, really lonely, especially when you're trying to drive change through. And you have to be really brave, not reckless, but you have to be brave. And it's almost like you've got this character default because you're being brave and valiant and driving things forward, and you're saying the right things and nobody's understanding you. And I think being brave is a really critical thing for us as leaders, as technology leaders, to kind of embrace and understand about ourselves. And understand what our leadership style is. I worked with a CTO recently who's brilliant, absolutely brilliant, really inspiring, fantastic leader, but his leadership style is really quite abrupt, and it could come across as quite autocratic. But he recognised it, and so what he did was he recognised that there were certain parts of his customers on their maturity scale who needed some warm, fuzzy, fluffy hand-holding. And he couldn't do it. He knew that his style wasn't that. And so he brought somebody into his organisation to do that. It's to be warm and fuzzy and hand-holding. And so I guess it's about understanding where you are contextually with your communication style and with your audiences. And I guess it's about to communicate with impact and to gain that trust. It can often be, as we saw with the CTO, who got somebody to do the warm, fuzzy stuff, it's the same message, but sometimes it might need just a slightly different voice. Anyway, I'm going to stop now on being understood and communication styles. So I want to talk about how we prioritise. This is another theme that came up last night, was we're firefighting, right? And we need to be driving our organisations to understand what the future might look like and how we define business value for them. So there are two broadcasters in the UK who are organising themselves like this currently to really understand how they prioritise the now with the future. So I just want to take you through this a little bit because it is rather fantastic what they're doing, and they're really starting to see some successes. Channel 4 and ITV have organised themselves like this. So the technology layer all reports into strategy. So there's nowhere to hide. They are really, really front and centre of the business and every strategic decision that's been made about the future of their organisations. So how are they doing it? Well, on the strength, it's quite simple. But with varying successes, it's going to be a 3-year programme of change to get to this. But what they've done is they've ripped out all of the departmental budgets so that somebody in HR with their pet project can't, because they've got the loudest voice, can't get it actually made. Everything is in one budget. I think everyone's got a small pot of money for hardware, but I think that's it. So everything's rolled up into one budget, taken away from all of the departments. The strategic direction of both organisations is mapped against the technology roadmap. And Channel 4 particularly, I've been close to that, so I'll just talk to that slightly. With the CIO and the CTO, there was a tension between those two, and two roles. And one of the sort of received wisdom is that that role would go to one role and not remain at two roles. And how they've organised it is they recognised that there was a really healthy tension between the now and the future. So how they organised it was they have given the day-to-day, keeping the lights on services to the CIO, and the CTO is looking to the future. So in terms of their leadership, they are working together, and that whole elasticity of leadership, they're moving backwards and forwards together, but the CTO is out in the future, and what he does is then comes back and lobs it over the fence to the CIO to make it run. So it's a really interesting time for them in terms of how their technology is being organised and how their teams are being organised. The other thing to note is that there isn't a technologist that's leading any project. It's always ahead of a business department, whether it's finance, whether it's advertising. Advertising is a big one for all the broadcasters at the moment. And the models are changing significantly. So, and so that naturally there are big projects looking at how technology is driving changes and value to the advertising food chain. And so that's been led by the advertising department rather than the technologists. Obviously, they are in partnership, but the face of those projects are the business teams. They're using traditional communications as well to communicate to their wider stakeholders. So they're using things like posters on the backs of lavatory doors, postcard drops on desks, that kind of thing. So real traditional media communications, not an email being sent out from the IT department that everybody just deletes. They're using their marketing departments to communicate what they're doing, which is really successful for them. And obviously, we have to talk about governance. I'm not going to, but obviously there's a whole great big wrap of governance around all of that. So finally, I want to talk about disruption and how other people are actually achieving some disruption in their business sectors. As I said, my experience is predominantly media, but I have done a little bit actually recently in banking and insurance, which has been utterly fascinating. So the organisations that I've worked in are looking at a range of different ways of looking at disrupting themselves. And so they're looking at, the government have been seed funding ideas. Barclays have got a boot camp that they set up this year. And what they're doing is they're throwing money over the fence to startups and giving them a bunch of challenges or problems that their media sector, their sector is facing, and asking them to come up with a remedy to that. So there's lots of opportunities for that because it's getting fresh ideas. There's not a huge upfront capital cost, but obviously there are challenges because not everything is going to be a success, and quite often these startups are pre-revenue, so they're not proven. But very, very interesting that some organisations are doing that. ITV Studios, so ITV Studios is the organisation that makes all of the content. So they don't just make it for ITV, they make it for BBC, Channel 4, but they are a studio that makes content. And what they're doing is they're buying independent programme makers up, so they're seed funding new startups in a similar way we just spoke about. And all they want is first look at new programming. If it's not for their channels, then they'll pass on it, and the startups can then go and pitch it to other TV channels. But then they own the IP on that, and then they can sell the intellectual property or the formats abroad. So that's how some of the media organisations are doing it, through strategic investment in smaller companies. Straight-up acquisition tends to be more on the technology platform side, so the likes of Google are looking at straightforward acquisition of startups to prompt innovation within and disrupting themselves in their own organisations. In the media sector, they've got a bit of cold feet around it because anybody remember Friends Reunited? So ITV bought that for, I think it was 80 million. Gosh, it could have been 80 billion, but 80 is something. Anyway, a huge sum of money, and eventually sold it for 1 million. So it was a disaster for them. And similarly with MySpace, there was a huge race on between News Corp and MTV to buy MySpace. News Corp won, spent a huge amount of money on it, and then sold it at a significant loss a few years later. Actually, Justin Timberlake now owns MySpace, interestingly. So lots of challenges there with acquisition, but that's certainly how some organisations are looking to disrupt themselves. And partnerships is another one. Now, people in the media industry have been talking about partnerships for a long time. The last 10 years, I'd say, about it's the way forward. So traditional business model has been, we've got loads of content, we're going to sell it to you, Mr. B Sky B, you're going to give us lots of millions of dollars for that content. And what partnerships are looking, there's one happening just coming together at the moment with Channel 4, Spotify, Paul Weller, who obviously owns his own music, and he's got his production company, and Volkswagen, which is why that Beetle's there. And no one's paying anyone for that content. No one's paying anyone anything for the airtime. No one's paying anything for anything. They're just working together because they know that all of those collective partnerships can deliver much more value back out to their customers, their customer segments. So it's quite an interesting model that's that's kind of gaining currency now and is really, really disrupting some of the traditional revenue models within my field. There are challenges with that because, you know, we don't know who is going to own the audience, who owns that data. So does everybody know about Prime, or Amazon Prime with their drones? Have you all seen this? It's absolutely brilliant. So Amazon are looking at, this is how they're disrupting themselves. They're looking at deploying drones to deliver content within half an hour of placing the order, which I think is extraordinary, and I can't wait for it. Anyone seen this? This is currently disrupting the banking market. So this is an electronic device. I'm really quite interested, actually, in microtechnology and the fact that nobody really owns that yet. But I digress. Coin is it's a credit card, and it's electronic. And basically, you load all of your credit cards and loyalty cards, and God knows I've got in so many loyalty cards. I don't know about you, but my purse is just fat with them. And they've just got $14 million of investment last month. They're an American company, and it launches in the summer. We'll wait and see what happens with it. But that's currently, a lot of eyes are on that from the fintech, financial technology areas. Oh, hang on. This one, I have to say, is a personal favourite, and I love the way that this is disrupting this particular market. It's a little video. I'll just play that. Can I play that? Oh, yes.
If you own an iPod, iPhone, or digital video player, then you need TV Hat. Private, portable, and hands-free. TV Hat provides a motion picture experience absolutely anywhere.
So how does this thing work?
All right, so first off, put these earbuds in.
Okay.
All right, and I'm going to take this player and slip it right in the pouch at the front of the bill. And you put on TV Hat. And then last, you slide down the custom lens.
Oh, wow.
Right?
This is so cool.
It's a great product.
Man, I don't know. It looks kind of weird. This is awesome. Man, all right, let me try. No, get your own.
My kids would love this. My husband would love this.
Try the product the Wall Street Journal said stood out among its peers at the Consumer Electronics Show. The custom magnification lens provides a big screen experience straight from your own iPod, iPhone, or digital video player. Getting through a long commute?
I think that's enough of that. Isn't that fantastic? So I just very quickly want to spend a little bit of time on how we energize ourselves internally and our teams, and how we energize our business partners and meet towards innovating and disrupting. This is something that I go into organizations and do, and it's really effective, and you can do it yourselves. The concept is around, I call it labs and Launchpads. You can call it what you like, but it's based around the Eric Ries book, the Lean Startup book. Who here is an Agile, runs Agile? Yeah? Okay. So it's based, the terminology, it's not difficult if you're an Agile organisation to kind of grasp. It's just completely different language, so do look at the language differences, and it'll give you some really good insight on leading a workshop using the language of business, but really you're using Agile language. And it's all based around this concept of build, measure, and learn. So you've got a problem that you need to solve, and you invite your key stakeholders, so a range of stakeholders, not just technologists, but business leaders, and your teams as well. And what I do is we do a 2-day workshop, and we have a particular problem. So, for example, the RSA job that I did recently with an organisation called Flux was really interesting. The problem they wanted to solve was that they had a payout every year of £50 million from tiles blowing off a roof. And so a tile had shifted, very small, but the damage was significant, and it was costing them £50 million a year. So that was one problem. The other problem they wanted to solve was they had 1 million customers who had pets. 75% of them were obese, the pets. And obese pets have the same issues and problems as obese humans. And so they needed to solve that as a problem because they were paying out on these obese pets. So those are the two problems. We broke out into teams. We came back with some ideas about how we were going to solve those problems. And everybody went off in their teams, and they got to a minimum viable product in 2 days. So with the pet problem, it was Weight Watchers for pets. So first off, they all went off and saw whether there was a market need for it. Did people want it? Back to the video at the start from 1966. Did they like it? Did they want that service? So they all went on Facebook and Twitter, on their nothing high-tech, nothing more than that. They also had a database from their insurance, obviously from their customers, and they sent out an email on their select few of their database, and there was a resounding yes. Yes, that's something we want. So they thought, great, we know that our customers want that service. So we got a visualizer in, and in 2 days we built a website and a Facebook page and a Twitter feed, and we got to a minimum viable product and put it out there. No big capital investment, no nothing. And then we presented it back to sort of a Dragon's Den style leadership team to see if they would then invest money into it, like a lean startup, like we were looking at before. And so there was the idea. We then went and built it. The product, it doesn't have to be a product. It can be a service as well to fix a solution or to fix a problem, rather. Then you measure whether it's effective or not. You look at the data, you learn, then you revise. So it's kind of sounding familiar from an agile perspective, isn't it? But actually it's a business process. It's a lean startup business process. And it's a really good way of getting your teams and your customers to work together and share each other's challenges and deliver an output at the end of it. So do urge you to go and get that book if you haven't got it already, and have a look at that and start thinking about how you might use it to energize internally and your external customers. And I guess that really is me done, I think. The business value and the partnership, again, is part of the lean startup thing, is how we get to a sustainable model and to ultimate transformation. So we've gone through all of that: trust, communication, prioritization. We've disrupted ourselves before anyone's disrupted us, and we've finally got to, we're going to take the business on a journey of transformation. And I've just finished with this last slide, which I'm very interested to hear last night that this is something that you're already looking at, and that is sort of invest in partnerships with all of your universities and looking at spare capacity. So I think you were looking at it from a technology perspective, so from a storage perspective. But I think from a resource perspective, it's also something to look at, is to share. In the media industry, yes, we've all got different commercial imperatives. Yes, it's fiercely competitive with ratings and who's going to drive the most ad revenue, apart from the BBC, of course. But there are services and shared infrastructures that every organisation has to have, whether it's finance and payroll, whether it's HR, whatever that is. The back office functions particularly aren't competitive, so there might be something to look at there. And I thought it was fantastic that that's what you're already looking at, and that's something that I'm looking at with some of the people I'm working with at the moment, is how that happens without all of the trade secrets being shared as well. So this is how, just to recap, how other people are doing it. They're acquiring services, they're partnering with innovators, and I wish I could read that one over there. Oh yes, they're engaging with incubators. Any questions? Sorry, I rambled on for a bit longer than I expected to there. Any questions on that?
10 minutes
Yeah.
for questions?
No questions. I'll ask you a question. Do you think that in terms of where, for television at the moment, there's a real perception that everything is going to go digital, it's all going to go over the top, and that linear broadcasting with a schedule and an EPG is going to die, and it's just a question of when. But actually the data that we're seeing is not supporting that. And I just wonder, does that resonate with you? Yes, yes. Yeah?
So there's a growing practice in universities of automatically filming lectures.
Yeah.
Big part of university life.
Yeah.
And something that people are finding is that it doesn't necessarily make attendance go down just so that someone can play it later. And there's an idea of, I think Dave White at Oxford calls it eventiveness, that there's something about a synchronous live event that is still very valuable to people.
Absolutely. And I think if we compare industry sectors there just for a minute, and I do believe that there's significant parallels between what we do. Whenever anything is in the digital environment, the only time it drives an audience is when it's live. It's event-based. And I think it's because people do want that immediacy. They still do. They still want to share. From a TV perspective, yes, they're sharing. They're using Twitter to talk about it. That's what their water cooler moment is now. But they're still watching live, linear. Yeah. Yes, at the back there.
Just to support that, I think the death of cinema was predicted some time ago.
Yes.
And that hasn't happened.
No, quite. And books and newspapers. I mean, they've evolved, and it is the same. You know, we are the windows of content. So the windowing, a cinema releasing, you know, a big blockbuster movie, the windows have changed. So it would have been a couple of years before it was on Now TV, for example, and that's contracted. But yes, you're absolutely right. So the commercial model has shifted underneath that. And I think that's what we are kind of grappling with at the moment, is yes, it's, you know, what we're doing is still valid in the old way, but it's the commercial model underneath it is shifting. Any more questions? There was one.
Not sure I want to ask this, or if it's more of a vent of frustration rather than a question. Just when you're emphasising the importance of the live experience, I come from a university which, like many others, is probably paying tens of thousands of pounds for an ERA licence to allow our students to watch content on and potentially off-campus recorded content. And it's quite a substantial fee. And I'm trying at this very point to convince myself of the value. And it's difficult, and it just got a bit harder there when you were re-stressing the importance of the live experience.
Yeah. Well, what's your data? What's your data saying? Are people looking at it? Are they using it? What are they doing with it?
Not very much.
Yeah.
And if anything, in order to fix that, I'll have to spend some more money in order to provide a layer on top of, a software layer on top of that license to facilitate recording.
Well, why is it a requirement? Is it just an absolute requirement, and therefore you've got to make it work?
It's the software or the license?
I guess the service as a whole.
There is a perception that we should be providing access to that service. There will be valuable content there, I'm sure, but the usage levels are not strong, and the cost is quite large.
Yeah.
But the license itself is that safety net of legality, but it's a cost, and quite a significant percentage of the budget in that area.
Yeah. And is it your budget?
At this point, yes, but in essence, that doesn't really matter.
No.
40,000 pounds of university money is 40,000 pounds of university
Absolutely
money.
agree with you. I guess it's about that communication thing again, and partnering with whoever's making that decision that service is not being used.
Well, it is, but it's about value of the content as well. And you were stressing there about part of that value being in the live experience, but it's not always that.
No, it's not. No.
Okay,
Quite.
thank you.
Any more?
I've got one, if I'm allowed.
Go on, Heidi.
So one of the things that we hear a lot is that actually, well, what we say to ourselves is that we're different. So universities tell definitely departments within universities, but also universities say we're different. But it sounds to me, and you've worked with a number of industries, that actually all the issues we solve and the problems we have are all very similar, regardless of which business that we're in. So I suppose the question is, why do we keep telling ourselves we're special?
I think we all do, don't we? I'm special because I work in telly. I think that's human nature, and I think it's a cultural thing. You know, people go into education because they're minded to, and it's their passion, their interest, in the same way that people end up working at the BBC for 35 years. You know, I think it's part of who you are, and also it's a cultural, you fit there. And so I think to change that culture, you know, looking at kickstarting, partnering with innovators, and bringing some people in that aren't quite like-minded is perhaps something to look at. And it might be that it doesn't work, but there's no harm in trying these things and you know, fail forward rather than, you know, doing nothing. I think it's really important to keep challenging that cultural norm, actually.
Any more? Oh, one at the front here. Just wait for the mic.
You said that people are still watching telly in a linear fashion, and what's the PG who's not going to die tomorrow.
Yeah.
But are you recognising any patterns in who are still watching TV in a linear fashion to the generation? Because I certainly don't watch a lot of live TV.
No, I don't
either. The majority
either.
of TV that I consume is either recorded, even just to kind of skip through the adverts.
Yeah. There's an organisation called ThinkBox, and it might be interesting for you to go and have a look at some data, some research that they published in the last couple of weeks about audience segments. And what they have said is that, as I said, 79% are watching linear live TV, the rest aren't. But it's about life stage, so that the TV audience are being lost at age, I think it's 18 through to 24, which obviously is your customer base. And I guess that's because they are viewing on a PC. They don't have the money for a subscription, so they're looking at it illegally in lots of cases. And that is a live stage, but what they're seeing is that the next demographic are going back to linear as they have families and they want to sit around the TV with their families. And then the next demographic to go away from TV is the retirement age. So they're moving and doing other things. What we don't know in looking at customer behaviour and how that changes our business models, what we don't know yet is this new generation of what they call digital by default, which I loathe, but anyway. The digital by default demographic that are in this life stage at the moment of being away from the television, whether they go back to it. So we don't know what they're going to be doing, and I think that's something we all need to keep an eye on, regardless of what industry we're in. So previously they would have gone back to telly at age 24, but we don't know yet. We don't know.
So predicting anything, particularly the future, is difficult, yes.
Yes, everything's going to change. That's what we can predict.
Okay. I think we've run out of time now. Can we all thank Linda again?
Thank you.